What is up, all of you Avatar The Last Airbender fans? The live-action adaptation has now been out for a little while. And how are you all feeling? Has anybody rewatched the show yet? I certainly have. And today felt like a great time to finally sit down and rank all of these episodes from best to worst. And that's not to say that any of them are really that bad, but a rank had to be done. But as always, before we dive in, make sure you smash like and subscribe if you're new here. Because if you don't, June said something about tracking you down. I don't even know if I trust her, to be honest, but you never know. So like I was saying, we've had a little bit of time now to sit with this series and kind of digest things. If you've been following my channel, you've seen that I've done reviews on each episode. I did my full series review. If you haven't caught any of those, please head over to my channel after this video and check those out. A lot of good Avatar content over there. But I'll say it again just in case you didn't know, I really enjoyed this series. Avatar The Last Airbender is so near and dear to my heart, and seeing the heart and soul of this series and also seeing how much everyone involved cares about the original, it's just been an awesome experience. But this is the fun part. Now we're going to start this rank, and I'm going to start from the bottom and go to the top. So we'll start with number 8, and my least favorite episode would have to be episode 7, The North. I talked a lot in my review of this episode how it kind of just felt like filler. Another thing that I did want to mention is something that I've even picked up on a little bit more after rewatching this series. It's just like when this show tries to adapt things one-to-one with the original, it feels a little bit off for me. Don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed it. Like the Katara and Master Pakku showdown in live action was so cool, and seeing some of those shots verbatim, it's pretty dang cool. But some of my favorite parts from this series that I'll definitely get to are just the surprises that came out of it, the stuff that I wasn't expecting. And so although this series does a great job of showcasing the Northern Water Tribe and getting us there and introducing Princess Yue and establishing that relationship with Sokka, there's a lot of fun moments within it. It just ended up being the most lackluster episode to me. But moving on to number 7, I'm putting episode 3, Omashu. And my reasons for this one being a little bit lower on the list don't have so much to do with adaptation and things like that, because there are some really fun surprises within this episode. They crammed several different storylines into it with Jet, you have Teo, you have the Mechanist, all of that stuff. But when it comes to this episode, it's just sort of a good time. It's almost like a point in the season where things stall out for a second and you're kind of waiting to get to Boomy. We see Boomy at the end of this episode, and the entire time I was just wanting Aang to get to Boomy because it's one of my favorite parts about the first season, that whole interaction. And so I was very much hoping to get there as quickly as we could. Now, I do want to say I thought all the Jet stuff was really, really cool. Introducing all of the freedom fighters, having those moments between Katara and Jet. It's definitely a learning moment for Katara, and there's also some character dynamics that are built upon with Sokka in this episode as well when he's working with the Mechanist. I also really loved the fight between Aang and Zuko. This is that one moment in the season where you're like, yes, dude, like that's what I've been waiting to see. Those two pitted against each other. Also, I've talked a lot about the landscapes in this show, but the city of Omashu looks absolutely beautiful. The first time around, I was so focused on like, what's going on with the story. The second time around, I really took the time to examine all the little details of this city, and it really is awesome to see Omashu in live action. And although this episode is a little bit farther down my list, like I said, none of these are really that bad. There are just some others that I like a little bit more. And with that said, we'll move on to number 6. It's episode 2, Warriors. And I think after watching this episode the first time around, after that Kyoshi entrance when she lands in the village and everything goes crazy, I was like, this is my favorite episode of anything ever. But after watching it again and comparing it to the rest and some of the feelings and emotions that I get out of the other episodes, it does rank a little bit lower, but I really love what they ended up doing with this episode. I really loved the interaction that Aang has with Kyoshi, giving him some guidance, but a little bit of hard-nosed guidance, some tough love. We also get a little bit of Zhao in this. This is when he's introduced, and then all of the Sokka and Suki stuff. Maria Zhang is just so dang good, dude, and watching this episode again, it makes you want the future of this show. It makes me want more seasons, and seeing the chemistry between her and Sokka, it's just brilliant. And we don't see Aang riding Elephant Koi, and we don't see the Unagi, and, that's too bad. Maybe I wanted to see that a little bit. But for what we got, riding off of the tail of episode 1, which to me was a big success, all of a sudden you're like, okay, where do we go from here? And I think they seamlessly just continued this journey and continued introducing us to this world that all felt so natural and lived in. But on to number 5, and this is one that I feel like a lot of people out there are going to disagree with me on. I'm probably going to get a lot of crap for saying this, but my number 5 is the finale, Legends. And this comes right back to the point that I was making with the North. It's one of those episodes where a lot of the things that are happening within it are so closely adapted that you're constantly comparing in your mind how things go in the original and how things are going in this. Obviously, they omit certain things like Zuko taking Aang and Aang being in the spirit world that entire time, but aside from that, it really is just beat for beat. So I think it's a little bit easier within this episode to be a little bit more judgy. Now, I thought that down the stretch, the way that they executed everything in the end, especially with Katara's speech to Aang while he's in the ocean spirit, or he is the ocean spirit, I should say, that gets me on an emotional level that I was looking for out of this finale. And so I would say the finale definitely delivered for me. And the action and the effects all delivered on such a grand scale. It's just one of those things where, like, I expected it to deliver. By the time we got to the finale, I was like, okay, this is gonna be awesome. And when making this list, I really did take a good look at each of these episodes and my experience watching them and the key emotional moments that got me throughout this series. And so yeah, Legends is number 5 in my rank, but I did still think it was a phenomenal finale. But on to number 4. In my best the face stealer voice that kind of sounds like Keanu Reeves, actually. Number 4, I'm putting Spirited Away. And you know, Spirited Away is one of those episodes with a lot of changes. It's very different than you're ever even expecting. I did not expect Ko to be coming in this early, and the way that they utilized him really just blew my mind. It's those surprises that I was talking about. It's watching this episode and things coming out of nowhere. When you're a fan of the original series like myself, I've watched the original series like 15 times, so I know what's happening in the first season, in Book 1, Water. But when it comes to this live-action adaptation, I was pleasantly surprised that I didn't know where this was going, and this was one of those key episodes where I was like, what the heck is going on? Like, Heibai isn't taking these villagers, like, this isn't the winter solstice. All of these key details from Book 1 were gone, and so you really got the sense, especially right here, that they were doing things their own way. And the fact that we got Wan Shi Tong, we got Heibai, we did get Ko the Face Stealer, the way that they went about adapting all of that and showcasing the spirit world in this one big way, and also having these moments with Katara and Sokka, with Ko tempting them, and just throwing a whole new twist on that character. I thought it was so much fun. You get a lot of background on these characters that I was very much needing at this point in the series, especially with Katara and Sokka, but you also get some good stuff with Zuko and Iroh. You get the introduction of June, and then there's the twist at the end with Gyatso and Aang showing up, and Gyatso still being there in the spirit world waiting for Aang. A little bit of emotion there, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, with this episode, with Spirited Away, the highlight is Ko and the interaction that Aang has with Ko. It was one of my most anticipated things going into this series. I just wanted to see how they were going to do Ko, and they did him in such a cool way. It was awesome. But getting to the top 3, my number 3 actually might surprise you a little bit. I went with Into the Dark, and you guys already clearly know, I just wanted to get to Bumi. I wanted to see Bumi, and this episode delivered for me in such a huge way. The earthbending in the end, and then showcasing the relationship dynamic between Aang and Bumi, and the subtle changes that they made to Bumi's character. They really harden this guy, and they make him a little bit bitter, a little bit resentful. I loved that down-to-earth, no pun, earthbending feel to the character. Because in the original, Bumi's awesome. He's so much fun. He's just basically a kid who is now in charge of Omashu, and he's just like, I'm Bumi. But then this live-action adaptation hits us with, okay, crazy Bumi, but also this is a real guy who just had to live through a 100-year war, trying to protect his people, trying to protect his city. It really hit me on a lot of different levels. I was very satisfied with the route that they took with that character. But this is also one of those episodes that has a lot of key, emotionally effective moments for me. You had the monologue from the Earthbender who lost his brother at Ba Sing Se, and the mirroring moment of Iroh who lost his son at Ba Sing Se and quit the war and decided decided to come home, and they show the funeral scene, and you have Leaves from the Vine playing in the background, and then you get into the relationship dynamic between Iroh and Zuko. The way that that episode ends on the ship, post-banishment, Zuko standing there, and Iroh coming up and being like, hey, you mind if I tag along for the ride? Zuko being like, I don't need a babysitter, uncle. And him being like, do you want a friend? That's the stuff that even gets me a little bit teary-eyed right now. Like, it really, really was effective for me watching this episode. And then also you compare that with The Cave of Two Lovers and having the musicians and all of that cool stuff from season 2, you know, them deciding to adapt little pieces that work well for this story that typically would come in book 2 was just another moment of, wow, they're doing things their own way, and they're utilizing this instead of Katara and Aang, utilizing this moment to be a Sokka and Katara building moment, a brother and sister coming together. The Badger Mole looked sweet, the earthbending was freaking awesome, and Leaves from the Vine made me cry. So but on to number 2. And for number 2, I put episode 6, Masks. And I even said it after my review of this episode. This was one of the episodes that I had the most issues with, but it also was one of the episodes that I enjoyed the most. And you can see it here. It's in my top 2. What they did well in this episode worked so well for me that it just elevates the entire things. I did have some issues with Roku, you know, and even on the second time watching, I still didn't really come around with that performance and the way that he portrayed that character. But the entire Zuko storyline in this episode is why we wanted a live-action adaptation in the first place. The Agni Kai, the stuff with Ozai, the little glimpse of Azula sitting in the audience kind of giving that smirk. It was so good. It was so good. And then expanding on all of that, you have Zuko who's healing, and he's sitting there with a bandage on his face. He's just witnessed such a traumatic experience. And then Ozai comes and visits and starts talking to him. There's so much little detail that we now know about that situation, the 41st Division stuff. It was almost like a White Christmas moment when Zuko gets back on the ship and everybody stands at attention. That was very emotional. But Dallas Liu's performance in these moments was very, very key for me. I was curious to see how Zuko was going to be, and now I'm so excited for the future moving forward. And then the other half of this episode, the Blue Spirit, literally something that I think all of us were so excited to see if they could pull off, and they literally did. Blue Spirit coming in, rescuing Aang, such amazing action, such cool airbending and martial arts and getting past the gates, and then having obviously the moment where Aang sees Zuko's face underneath there, but we also get some added depth there as well. We get this entire scene when they're hiding from the Fire Nation soldiers, and they actually get a little bit of chemistry going, and Zuko kind of warms up a bit until all of a sudden he goes cold, and it reverts back to the original series and that entire encounter that him and Aang have. I absolutely loved so much about this episode. The second watch completely sealed the deal for me. I was like, okay, I know I have a couple problems with it, and they're still there, but everything else works on a level that is so high for me. It's so good, and that's why it's my number 2. But moving on to my number 1, and at this point, if you do the math and you can kind of figure it out, it's pretty easy to see it's episode 1, Aang. And you know, choosing the first episode as my number 1, that doesn't mean that the entire season was all downhill from there. The entire season was phenomenal, but I think there's something so special about watching this first episode. I mentioned it in my review, but I woke up super early just because of the time change where I'm at with this show being released. I got ready. I was so excited to film and record my reaction. I sat down and I watched this thing, and it was so special, man. It really hit me hard, and the second time watching it, it hit me just as hard, because now it's just a nostalgic moment in my life. Being such a big Avatar fan, watching this live-action adaptation that I've been anticipating for so long, and the way that they absolutely knocked it out of the park. There's not a single moment in this first episode where I question anything. I'm completely along for the ride. I love the changes that they made. I love how they detailed the entire genocide of the air nomads. They show all of that in full until you get to Aang and you get those Gyatso moments, and they end up working that up and building that relationship up and showcasing that Gyatso really was that father figure for for Aang, and using him in the end when they're at the Southern Air Temple and Aang goes into the Avatar state. It's not Katara, it's Gyatso. It's always been Gyatso. He was Aang's connection to the past throughout this entire first season, and that's what the entire arc of his character has now been. Moving through and trying to get over the past, realizing you've been gone for 100 years. Yes, all of this stuff happened, but you have to figure out how to move on because the world needs you. And so I explain a lot of that in my review, just talking about that's why he wasn't learning waterbending here, because he clearly wasn't ready for that. Now we can move on to mastering the elements. There was so much riding on this one episode, the introduction of this series. I remember when the reviews started coming out, everybody was just like, yep, they nailed the first episode, and they absolutely did. You could say whatever you want about all the rest of the episodes. There's a lot of thoughts there. There's a lot of content there. It's 8 episodes, but flawlessly adapting The Boy in the Iceberg like this, introducing all of these different characters and making it work, and also getting us familiar with this world and ready to go on this journey. It was just perfect for me. Something that made me say, yip, yip. But you probably noticed that I can't even get through an episode rank without breaking down each episode like down to the detail. This is because I love this series so much. But I am very curious to know how you guys rank these episodes. Please let me know all of that down in the comments. Show me your list. Where do you put these? Do you agree with my list? Do you disagree with some of my stuff? I know that having the finale that far down might cause a little bit of controversy, so please let me know down below. I read every single comment that comes in, guys. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you smash like as well as subscribe. If you're new here, you can follow me on X at JonesVibesOnly, and don't forget to keep up the good vibes, guys. But do you guys remember earlier in the video when I did that Boomy impression? That was pretty bad.